If you think about it, the amount and variety of change that we here in the 20th century have experienced has been incredible. But change has probably been the one constant in all of our lives. That includes our forefathers and foremothers. As they moved from an agrarian to a pre-industrial to a technological society, work in America has changed drastically. It's important to remember that our colonial ancestors would probably be appalled by work life today. See, they were driven by the seasons. They hunted and fished by the seasons. They planted their crops, tended and harvested them by the seasons. Matter of fact, they even named the moons seasonal names to help them plan and celebrate their connection to the land. However, as they moved away from that agrarian rural lifestyle to a more industrial existence, the reliance on the seasons changed, and the pace and structure of their workday also changed dramatically. It was replaced by the bell and the whistle and a tremendous tedium. Now, looking at this village behind me, the village of Ashton in Rhode Island, is a fairly typical mill village. The families here worked in the mill, which is only 100 yards away. Their ideas about transportation needs and commuting needs were non-existent. The mill whistle blew and they went to work. And we're going to examine some of those issues around mill life here in the Blackstone Valley and get a feel for what it was like to live back then. So I'll tell you what, let's go and examine mill life here in the valley. The organizational structure of the mills had a great impact on life in the mill villages. Mill life here in the Blackstone River Valley, unlike its neighbor to the north, the Lowell area, was very paternalistic. Families owned small mills, and they provided housing for their workers. They provided services for the families of their workers. But there was a price to pay for that benevolence: low wages. What was the actual impact on the workers of this very paternalistic system? Well, I'll tell you what. Let's catch up with Professor Scott Molloy of the University of Rhode Island, a labor historian, to give us an overview of mill life here in the Blackstone Valley. Probably the best place to talk about mill life is in front of an old mill. And we're fortunate enough today to hook up with labor history professor Scott Molloy, who teaches at the University of Rhode Island, to talk a little bit about mill life. Now, Scott, work life has changed dramatically over the last 150 years, hasn't it?
It has changed dramatically, and the changes began actually not only for Rhode Island but for the nation in the Blackstone Valley, especially at Slater's Mill. But once Slater's Mill was established, it seems entrepreneurs, wherever they found a New England stream, would put up a mill. And of course, right behind us, we have the Woonasquatucket River, which comes out of the northern part of Rhode Island and goes right down into the Providence River, right where the Blackstone Canal actually began, right next to Canal Street. And of course, this is the Atlantic Delane Mill, one of the most famous and oldest, as you can see, still hanging around. And although its grandeur is somewhat tarnished today, it was a place of tremendous employment, beginning even before the Civil War. Thousands of our great-great-grandparents would have found work here, at least temporarily.
Now, how was their life structured? What was mill life all about? I mean, the bell and the whistle kind of dictated where and when they came to work.
Well, we often forget in a day and age when we take an eight-hour day for granted, that their day stretched sometimes 10, 11, even 12 hours. And so for them, it was going to work, maybe having an hour or two for themselves, and then getting as much sleep as they possibly could. So you can imagine it was a very different type of world, a world that's centered on a neighborhood or a community, because no one had the time to jump in a car or a streetcar and go somewhere else to do the things they had to do every day, which was, by the way, buy fresh food if they had to.
Now, the institutions that a lot of the mill workers belong to, the church, and there are other kind of ethnic organizations were very important to them, weren't they?
Yes, you'd find that wherever possible and whenever time permitted, that these mill workers would belong to different groups, whether it was a fraternal group, whether it was a labor union or some type of religious institution. And oftentimes they found a way of fighting back at the mill owners through these different groups. You might have a priest or a minister who was sympathetic to the workers, and on a Sunday he might get up and harangue the awful working conditions. Or they might use their labor union as a way to get better benefits, slightly higher wages, and better working conditions. So there was always an attempt by these working people, however uneducated they might be, to try to ameliorate their condition, to make little small steps, kind of an installment plan to a better life someday.
And what was the relationship really between the mill owners here in the Blackstone Valley and the workers?
In the Blackstone Valley especially, there was a certain degree of paternalism. Many of the mills were family owned. Different members of the family might be in management position generation after generation. Because of that, they would know all the workers, and they might know the grandfather and the son and the granddaughter. So there was a certain sense of closeness, although there may have been a certain arrogance that went with the mill owner's part. But you paid a price for that. Oftentimes they might think a lot of you, but they didn't necessarily always pay the best wages. When you came to a place like Oneyville, which was large and impersonal, that's where you found your incipient labor unions. This is where people fought back. They were very militant. They would go on strike frequently. So they had better wages, they had better things for themselves, but they still had a large impersonal lifestyle. I think when people have fond memories of the mill, it's not necessarily so much the mill as it was the lives of the people in a world that was very less complex than today. Remember, they bought their food on a daily basis. They visited the butcher, the grocer, the candlestick maker. Everyone knew each other. The parameters of their life may have only stretched 4 or 5 blocks. And because everyone knew each other, they took care of one another, they looked after each other. And the mill was certainly a big part of their life, and they could go in there and feel secure. They were secure of the job. They knew they didn't make a lot of money, but the job was always there for them. Of course, in today's very overwhelming world, where it's tough to find a place where everybody knows your name, I think the older people look back with a certain amount of wistfulness, and one can't blame them, because life has become so dominated today by impersonal forces. Yeah, you'd find an occasional mill owner who was indeed paternalistic in the sense they were the ones that might give you a Christmas turkey. If somebody was sick, they might come around with some type of a fruit basket. They were indeed concerned about the welfare of their people. But they always did it from the perspective of a benevolent despot. Now, that is that they could be as nice as they wanted, but it was because they wanted to be. And don't you tell them that they had to give you a little extra. That's usually where they drew the line. But even some of the good owners would often hire management, that is a second-tier level below them, who often were as mean as could be. But then, of course, the owner would step in and perhaps make things right and look as though that he really cared. And yet they would have people underneath them, overseers, who were very, very tough with the people that worked for. It's an entirely different mindset. And for someone growing up today, it's as alien as perhaps the 21st century would be to us today. But some of the little anecdotes are always funny. There's a great fellow named Al Sisti, still alive, lives up the street today from Oneyville. And he started working the mills back in the early 1920s. And he tells a story of some of the funny working conditions they had to toil under. And one time the owners were trying to find a cheaper substance for clothing, and what they did was mix rabbit hair with wool. And if you know anything about rabbit hair, it's kind of sticky. He said at the end of the day, all the little kids, and there was a lot of child labor in those days, working at 12, 13 years old, because it was a hot, sticky day, when they came out, all the rabbit fur was stuck to these little kids, and he said they looked like little bunnies when they came out of work because the mohair kind of stuck to them. And they did away with it, by the way. They couldn't make that experiment last. I also remember Al Sisti telling me that because the mills were so infested with bugs and vermin and things, even if it would try to be kept clean, that they used to hang their lunches by a string from one of the moving pieces of machinery. And so that the cockroaches, when they went through down the string to try to get to the lunch, the vibration of the machinery would knock them off, and that was the only way they could keep their lunches from being devoured by these insects in the mills.
That's incredible.
Yeah, The unions, however, that did grow up in the textile communities, whether they were in the Blackstone Valley, in Olneyville, or in the other side of the state, were part and parcel of everyday life. You didn't have an organizer coming from Timbuktu to organize these people. The organizers were people that you worked next to. And so they were seen not as outsiders, but as insiders. And so when they stuck up for you, people felt that, hey, this isn't someone I have to worry about trusting. This is someone who may be my neighbor. This is someone I've worked alongside of for 10 years. There was more of a comfortable factor, if you will. So that sometimes they didn't stick out as much, perhaps, as you get into the battles of the 1920s and 1930s. And also, working people in those days, the strikes were perhaps less militant. They might just leave the place and not come back. And they'd stay out for 2 or 3 weeks until management or somebody came to their senses, and they'd work out a deal and then go back. It was a different mindset.
Right.
And for us, it doesn't look familiar.
How do the workers know when to go to work in the morning? And how do the workers know it was time to go home at night, that they'd finished their job for the day? Well, the answer lies in the bell in the mill tower. And every mill had one. The question is, how'd they know when to ring that bell to let the workers know it was time to go home? Very interesting question, and one that has a very interesting answer. So let's catch up with Ranger Suzanne Buchanan and find out who rang the bell and when.
Hi, this is Ranger Buchanan bringing you a Blackstone moment. Today I'd like to talk to you about the time of day in the Blackstone Valley. Can you imagine a time where back in history people would get up as the sun rose and go to bed when the sun went down? And how life was so simple back then, until the birth of the American Industrial Revolution, when the mill owner would regulate the time of day for his workers. He'd ring the bell to wake them up in the community, give them a short time to have breakfast, ring the bell as a warning signal for 10 minutes they had to report to work. And then he'd ring the bell for the 3rd time in the morning, and the gates would lock, letting the workers know that they've missed their call and they're late for work. The bell tower provoked many feelings from the mill workers. And well written is a quote from an Irish mill worker that states,
I'm going home, where I shall not be obliged to rise so early in the morning, nor be dragged about by the factory bell, nor confined in a close, noisy room from morning to night. I shall not stay here. Up before day at the clang of the bell, and out of the mill by the clang of the bell, and into the mill at the clang of the bell, and at work in obedience to the ding-dong of a bell, just as though we were so many living machines.
but one thing that the mill owners did do to the workers is they regulated the time of day. They were very sneaky, for they would prolong the time, enabling them to get more work out of their workers. For they would ring the bell earlier than the actual time the workers thought they were reporting to work. And he'd keep them here longer, for if they did not have a clock or a watch, who were they to tell if it was the proper time of day? For the prominent people in the community were the keepers of time, mostly them being the mill owners. So the mill workers, they become aware of all this, and they don't think they're being treated fairly on the proper time of day. So community time competed with mill time. The bell tower here at the mill signified mill time, but throughout the Blackstone Valley, you'll see clock towers on churches, meeting houses, city halls, town halls, and that would be community time. So that the mill worker, when the bell went off, you would bet that they would look up over at the community time and make sure they were properly having their work assigned to them. So this has been Ranger Buchanan bringing you a Blackstone moment and offering you to come spend some time in the Blackstone Valley. We'll catch you around.
Each mill had its own personality, and each mill owner had their own way of doing things. And right here in Hopedale, Massachusetts, the industrial age actually began as part of a communal living experiment. The practical Christian socialists under Aidan Ballou and Ebenezer Draper actually began one of their enterprises right here in the Little Red Shop back in 1841. And it grew to be the largest manufacturer of weaving looms in the world. Now, the Draper Company had a lot of employees. What do they do with their days off? Let's find out. On this beautiful summer day in this beautiful little town of Hopedale, Massachusetts, we're here with Elaine Molloy, who is the head librarian here at the Bancroft Memorial Library, to talk a little bit about mill life from the Draper perspective. Now, Elaine, you've been head librarian here about 6 years now. What kind of impact did the Drapers have in the town, and how did the mill workers here look upon the Draper family?
Well, the workers, from what I can tell, were really a happy group. They had a lot of things done for them, and I believe for the most part they really appreciated it. They would, the Drapers, for example, would go in and redo any room you wanted. Once a year they would give you wallpaper and paint. They even gave you free light bulbs and things of that nature, and it was a happy, quiet time. Draper Corporation used to have a wonderful field day in the town park, which is just up the street. These field days would be in mid-August every year. They started in 1901 and they went through the early 20s. They were literally attended by thousands of people, and they had a wide range of activities: canoeing, swimming, tennis, wheelbarrow races, hurdles, any type of activity you can think of, it was included in these field days. The wheelbarrow race, I can find evidence of 3 different types they had. One was actually pushing another person in a wheelbarrow. Another one, the person being in front would have a little wheel that he was pushing. And then the other one, the third type, the person in front was actually walking on his hands.
Now, canoeing was a very important leisure activity for mill workers, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. They, of course, we had the pond here, which made it water very accessible, and without many cars around at that time, everybody had a chance that they could get down to the pond and enjoy it.
Now, the town of Hopedale itself has a long tradition of beauty, with Aiden Ballew's and the practical Christian socialists. But the Drapers kind of picked up on that theme as well, didn't they?
Yes, they did. They really wanted a garden-like appearance through the town. They did not allow fences, and they really wanted the factory to be the center of this garden. They also built the parklands around the pond, which is a wonderful hiking area. There are even now picnic tables up through there, and it's a great place for cross-country skiing and just a real peaceful place. They also built the town beach. They brought in sand for it, built the bathhouse, built the bandstand. I believe that it was over 400 duplexes that the Draper Corporation owned at one time, and everything was just really very close-knit.
Why don't you explain a little bit what Cotton Chats is?
Yeah, the Cotton Chats was the newsletter from the Draper Corporation. The earliest copies we have go back to about 1900, and our copies go up to the 40s. They have all sorts of interesting information in these about the looms and different type of equipment they were building, and I believe of the field days they started in 1913, putting material and photographs of that in these. One thing I noticed of their sort of family atmosphere they had, that even during the Depression, everyone took an equal cutback in their time, so no one ever really had to be concerned that they would be without a job. Everybody shared in the difficult times together. One other story I remember, that my father worked in the mill for over 40 years. He was totally deaf, but in the shop with the vibrations of the machines, he could hear as well as you and I.
There was a very tight connection between the mill and the mill worker, both physically and emotionally. Now we're standing down here on the Berkeley Oval, one of the centers for Mill League baseball here in the Blackstone Valley. Diamond's here, the mill is right over to my left, and on the other side of the mill is the village of Berkeley. All nice and compact. You can't miss the physical connection. Ah, but the emotional one. It's a little harder to pinpoint, but I think I have a solution. Let's travel down to East Providence, Rhode Island, and catch up with a number of folks who can tell us a little bit more about the emotional aspect of mill life.
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, I was from the mill, from right down. I'm third generation. So that mill life was my life, you know, my home life, you know. But we all got along very well together. I'm from Rumford Chemical Works. And my mother was like she used to make bolters that they would sift the powder through. So she made them. My father was a truck driver, and then I came along. So then I was down in, well, I worked right in the factory where the baking powder was made. Oh yeah, we all enjoyed it. Yeah. There was never any, well, controversy or anything. If it did, we ironed it out between us. There was never anything like that.
Well, I was a union official, but not in the beginning, but I ended up as a high-pressure boiler operator, and so I was mostly isolated, but going and I found out that it was a very good place to work. In other words, you advance by seniority. It was department seniority, and then it was plant seniority, you know? So you could always do your job, and you know, if you, like myself, I always try to do the best job I could, and I like my work, and you have this opportunity to move to other jobs, and you could always work overtime in other jobs, and so you became very versatile. In fact, most of the people there could handle a lot of jobs, you know. Whoever was open could take it, you know. And so there was many jobs there, and everybody was good. They all liked their jobs. In fact, I had a guy come over one time. He was looking to be a master mechanic, and I took him around, and he said, "Chief, what's going on over here? There's hardly any employees." Well, everybody knew what they were doing. We got along. We did go on a strike in 1957, and I always told people, I used to be a state representative when I was campaigning, and I'd go to other union halls, and they'd ask me, "What about our strike rights?" And I'd tell them in the end that if you go on strike, you're never going to get back what you've lost, because you can never make it up, not even a lifetime what you lost. We used to get 4 weeks vacation, time and a half on overtime, double time on Sundays, and you were just throwing it away, you know. So I would preach that we should stay on the job and try to reconcile our differences. We had a grievance board, and we would meet with the manager, and we'd try to straighten out the problem, and we were very successful, you know, as far as that's concerned. We won some, we lost some, but nobody got mad.
Well, it was like a whole big family, that's all. Originally, the store had a company store there that took care of people, and the pay wasn't good, but they treated you good.
Yeah.
And if you were behind anything, charge it up and they pay it off later and so forth. Workers got along with each other the same way. Each guy helped the other guy out if he wanted to do something. And I only worked there during the 4 years I was going to college in the summer times. Of course, I enjoyed it. My dad worked there for 45 years, so I had to be careful what I did. But I enjoyed it.
And that's how
But
it
was a family, big family. That's what it actually was. And every year they had a clam bake. As long as I can remember.
Christmas
time, they had Christmas parties for the kids and everything.
Yeah.
The Rumford Chemical Works bought this property in 1878. It had been in the Hunt family until 1866. They got together with Sales Finishing and a dye company, and those two factories were in Phillipsdale. They decided there was a need for entertainment for the employees on weekends. And so they jointly formed the Hunts Mills Recreation Park, and they built a carousel a Japanese tea room, a dance hall, a midway with all sorts of buildings extending along it. We only have one building left in the area, left from that period. It was the place for the employees to come on weekends to have picnic and dance and so on. And I remember my mother saying she could come here only if she came with her brothers. Its reputation spread, and the trolley cars, the tracks were laid out into this area, and you could come from Providence, circle around behind where the Hunt House is today, cross the Seekonk River, and go back to Providence on Taunton Avenue. In 1925, the dance hall burned very mysteriously, and that was the death knell for the recreation park.
Canoeing was a big part of life,
yes.
wasn't it?
Yes. There were 24 canoe houses along the 10-Mile River, parallel with Center Street in Rumford. As a matter of fact, a lot of the streets that run in off Center Street were the driveways to the boathouses along the river. They could canoe from the Omega Pond area up the 10-Mile River below the rapids, leave their canoes, walk across to dance, have picnics, ride the carousel. It was a neat time. It's gone forever. Oddly enough, even though Rumford was a factory village, it became a very nice rural area to do some very nice housing developments. This is one of the contradictions, that there should be such a nice residential area totally surrounding a factory. My grandfather came here in 1862 and worked for the company until he died in 1918. All I ever heard growing up were the wonderful stories of how the Rumford Company took care of their families.
On a cold December day in 1889, trade unions marched down the boulevards of Worcester, Massachusetts with a huge banner, and the banner read, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. The concept of recreation and personal time for mill workers was becoming a very important issue within the labor movement. So ending today's story on a baseball field in Fisherville, one of the larger mills here in the Blackstone Valley, is very appropriate, because it was baseball that brought a lot of families together. With a mill housing behind us and a mill, it's a perfect setting to talk about recreation, because recreation was a very important aspect of mill life. It was tedious, it was repetitious, and the din of working in a mill required some tender loving care for the workers. And they found that tender loving care from weekly picnics, or the Saturday night quadrilles, or through stiff sports competition, but found it they did. And sometimes the mill owners actually helped sponsor these kind of activities. And sometimes the workers had to find their own peace despite the efforts of the mill owners. And I'm going to tell you that working in the mill wasn't all it's cracked up to be. A lot of people hated it. Not all the mills treated their workers fairly. But you find from listening to some of the people we talked to today that they developed a strong sense of community, and that community centered around the local mill. Well, this has been Chuck Arning, ranger of the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor, saying, I hope you've enjoyed this glimpse of mill life, and I hope we catch you in the valley someday.